stopped. Lovely. Okay, so if you could keep your microphones off for this part of it. One of the recordings will be put on the website, so if you do need to reference back to any of the slides or anything I've said, they'll be available on the website. Now, it is quite detailed and it is quite long, so please do sit comfortably and I will work my way through it, and then, as I said, we'll have opportunity for questions at the end of it. Let's make sure I can move the slides on. There we go. So I'll approach this by just trying to give you a general overview and information about the promotion scheme itself. And then we'll look in a little bit more detail at the criteria and how they align with the different promotion levels. And then there'll be some final comments. And I've added in an extra final comment slide from the last briefing, which is just a bit of a reflection on things that I've observed that I would like to highlight to potential applicants. So I've added in a sort of bonus slide to highlight some of those as well. So I'll move the mouse again. There we go. Okay. So starting with the overview. So the way the scheme is approached, it's based on each applicant achieving a set against a set of recognised standards. It's based on academic peer review, including some external review elements to it. There is no cap on the number of places that are available, so it is entirely based on achievement against the recognised standards, and it's a regular repeating process. So academic promotions is opened twice a year, once every 6 months. High levels of performance are expected across 3 core criteria. So you'll hear me use that phrase, core criteria, quite a number of times. And the core criteria are in the areas of research and scholarship, teaching and learning, and contribution. So contribution broadly covers what some of you might also recognise as good citizenship. It can cover contributions to within the university, but also external to the university at regional, national and international levels. So we will look a bit more in detail at those criteria, and just to say there's a lot of supporting information available on the university website. If you look up academic promotions, there's a lot of guidance and a lot of information about the criteria available. As candidates are expected to demonstrate that they're performing at the level to which they've applied for promotion, and we'll talk a little bit more about those levels, and also that they're likely to continue performing at that level. So that's where the word trajectory is relevant. So the promotions committee is looking at how the candidate is currently aligned with the criteria, but also for evidence that that performance is going to be ongoing into the future, or indeed on an upwards plane. All normal academic and administrative activity can be included in the application. All academics with a minimum of 3 years of service in an academic post at the University of Galway are eligible to apply to any higher grade, irrespective of their current grade. And it's also the case that, for example, someone who's in a Lecturer A track may apply for the Senior Lecturer Associate Professor grade on the Lecturer B track. So you can swap tracks if you feel that's most appropriate and most aligned with where you're going and where your strengths are that you want to highlight within your application. The promotion committees, which are called APC and EPC, are gender balanced, exactly 50-50 male and female. So I'm sorry, alphabet headache warning. So you'll come across quite a lot of acronyms. So APC is the Academic Promotions Committee, and it deals with the Senior Lecturer, Associate Professor, and the Professor in levels. And EPPC is the Established Professor Promotions Committee, and it deals, as it indicates, only with established professor promotions. The university is committed to equality, diversity and inclusion in the scheme, and it's the progress in this regard is constantly monitored and reviewed and reported all the way up to UDROS Nahal Scholar. It includes specific mechanisms for recognising protected leave and for adjusting achievements in recognition of periods of protected leave. And the adjustment calculation for this is done by the Office of the Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. There's also a specific box on the form where a candidate can offer any additional evidence they might want to share in respect of either their achievements or circumstances that they believe may have had an impact on their achievements. And there's another box also on the form, which has been there since round 3, which is a COVID impact box. And this also is there for candidates to use should they want to specifically call out any impacts that they feel COVID may have had, or the activities around COVID and the impairments that may have taken place that they would like the committee to be aware of and to take into consideration. Financial considerations in respect of the affordability to the school, college or university don't play any part in the individual assessment. So it is entirely based on alignment with the criteria. All unsuccessful candidates will receive detailed written feedback on their application and their agreed score sheet. They can also request oral feedback. So you need to request that within a timely fashion should you be unsuccessful. So within 30 days of receiving the written feedback, and a meeting will then be arranged with assigned members of the promotions committee to give that feedback. Other documents such as the external assessment forms can be sought if required through the Freedom of Information process. Excuse me. All unsuccessful candidates also have the opportunity to appeal to the Academic Promotions Appeals Committee. So another acronym, I'm afraid, APAC. So it is a requirement that in order to appeal to APAC, you do need to have received your oral feedback and then to lodge your appeal within 30 days of having received that feedback. The role of the APAC is to consider whether or not due process has prevailed in consideration of the work of both APC and EPPC during the application for promotion. The APAC does not form a second judgment on the application. There are 3 grounds for appeal to APAC: failure to follow due process, denial of natural justice, and manifestly unfair or unreasonable application of the criteria by the committee in the granting of promotions. And there is a specific email, which again is available on the website, to lodge an appeal to the Academic Promotions Committee. So as I said, in terms of the promotions committees, there are 2 committees: the APC, which is the Academic Promotions Committee, which looks at senior lecturer and associate professor, both type A and type B, and professor in applications, and the EPPC, which looks at established professor applications. So the APC, the Academics Promotion Committee, is made up of 14 members, and in advance of the committee meeting, once all applications for a round have been received, core readers are allocated to each application. So there are 4 core readers. 2 of them are from the applicant's college, and 2 of them are from the other colleges within the university. And the core readers are gender balanced 50-50. So the core readers, one of their jobs is to know that they will be reading in very particular detail the applications that they're allocated to, though I do say that all members of the committee both read and score all applications. One of the 4 core readers is then designated as the feedback lead. So they take very detailed notes during the discussion, and that forms the basis of feedback to the applicants. And also the core readers often lead out on the discussion. of an applicant's, the criteria in an application. So the feedback that the core reader captures is reviewed and agreed by the whole committee as part of the process. As I said, all applications are read by each member of the committee, and each member of the committee assesses and scores each individual application independently of any other committee member prior to the committee meeting. These are provisional scores. There are two external members of the committee. So on APC, they're observers. So they're observing process. They're able to interrupt if they think that we're going off process. And they also support me as chair, should I call them in asking for advice on a specific point or issue. The committee as a whole discusses and agrees a consensus score for each criterion for each candidate. So once the committee meets, once we've gathered in all of the individual scores, the provisional scores, the committee will meet and discuss each of the criterion for each applicant. And that will become a little bit clearer as I go through. I'll be able to show you an example of a score sheet. So hopefully it will make a little more sense if you haven't seen one before. And ultimately, for each of the criteria that we're looking at, there will either be a decision of yes, the criterion has been met, or no, the criterion hasn't been met. And that's done by consensus. So the committee has to agree a consensus score. So the Established Professor Committee works in a very similar way, except that it is a smaller committee. And the two key differences are that there are two core readers allocated to each application, which again reflects the size of the committee. The core readers, one will be from the applicant's college and one will be from one of the other colleges in the institution, and core readers are gender balanced. And in this case, the external members of the committee also score and participate in the discussion of each application. Other than that, the process followed is the same as that for the APC. So as I've described, prior to the meeting of either APC or EPC, each committee member submits their provisional scores in respect of each candidate. And all of those scores are then transposed onto a single spreadsheet. And this forms the basis for the discussion during the meeting. So there are three scores that a scorer can allocate. So score 1, 2, or 3. And a score 3 means that the assessor, the panel member, believes that the candidate is meeting the criterion as it's set out and described in the guidance documents. A score 2 indicates some level of uncertainty and need for discussion. And a score 1 can indicate that the assessor doesn't think that the candidate is meeting the criterion, but it can also be a mechanism for ensuring that there's discussion held about that criterion. So where there are a majority of 3s and no 1s, the score automatically becomes a yes for that particular criterion. And again, I'll show you a form in a moment, and this will make a little bit more sense. Where there are any other combinations, so not a majority of 3s or a combination of 1s, 2s and 3s, then it prompts a discussion by the committee around that criterion, which is usually led out by the core readers. And ultimately, the committee has to reach a consensus on whether the decision is going to be a yes or a no for each of the criterion. The protected leave multiplier, if it's relevant, and any COVID impact statement or any other supporting information in the other box that I mentioned is highlighted to the committee as part of the process and is factored into the discussions of the committee. So here you can see an example of a score sheet. So you can see we've got the 14 assessors here and their scores. So each assessor scores each of the criterion that the applicant has applied against. So this example, which is entirely fictitious, is an example from the senior lecturer, associate professor level. And that is because at that level, there are 3 core criterion that every applicant has to apply against, which are, if you look at the columns 1, 2, and 3, they're labelled at the top there: research and scholarship, teaching and learning, and contribution. And just to explain what I meant about the majority or all of score 3s, if you look at column 2 there in teaching and learning, all of the assessors have scored a 3 for that criterion. So that criterion will automatically become a yes, because everyone is in agreement that the criterion has been met. And if I carry on going across this table, you can then see that there are 10 other criterion here numbered with Roman numerals. So because this is the senior lecturer associate professor grade, what applicants are asked to do is pick out 5 of the criterion that they think that they have the strongest application against. And it can be a combination. So as you can see in this example, it's a combination of some more research criteria, some supervisory criteria here, national and international standing, and some teaching criteria. So just to take this example a little bit further, if we look at Roman numeral 4, that column, you can see that there are a couple of 1s in this column, and that means that we will definitely be discussing this criterion as a committee. But in this example, you can see that ultimately the consensus view of the committee was that this criterion had been met. So there is a misunderstanding that whenever one member of the committee scores a 1, it automatically becomes a no, and that's not the case. What it does is it prompts discussion. But if you look at the next column along, so Roman numeral 5, their national and international standing, you can see there's a combination of 1s, 2s, and 3 scores. A discussion was held in relation to this criterion, and in this case, the consensus view was that this criterion wasn't met, and it became a no. So it gives you a sense of how the committee operates and what the role of the scoring is, and that provisional scores are just that, they are provisional scores, and discussion follows. I will flick back to this chart a little bit later because there's something else I'll explain, but we'll keep going for now. So candidates are expected to engage fully with their head of school before applying and after the outcome of the process. Whatever the outcome, charting a path forward with your head of school is really important. There's a head of school form which must be countersigned by the college executive dean, and then it's submitted by the head of school. As candidates, you would have the right to view this form, and you have a right to response should you want to use it. So there are default adjectives which guide the level of that the promotions committee are looking for, so the level of performance really. And there's a lot of information about trying to describe the criterion, which, as I've said, is available on the website. But the adjectives that are used, unless explicitly stated otherwise, always default to substantial for a senior lecturer, associate professor level application, outstanding for a professor in application, and exceptional for an established professor application. So in line with the principles that apply in the scheme, all promotion grades are open to all academic staff. So just to reiterate that point. Following assessment and the establishment of what we call the prima facie case, so the conclusion of the committee that they are recommending this application for promotion, we then take the application out to external assessors. So once the prima facie case is established, the committee reviews the nominated external assessors, and should they align with the criteria set for external assessors, they will then we will then go and make contact with all of the external assessors and ask them to review the application. We've changed that slightly. It used to be done sequentially, but there's been huge delay in receiving responses for external assessors. So we're just trying a different approach at the moment to try and move the kind of final confirmation of promotion onwards more rapidly. So there are 8 nominations for external assessors, 4 from the applicant themselves and 4 from the head of school. And the head of school can see the nominations made by the applicant. So can sometimes do some balancing in terms of the criteria that's set out. So those external assessors should be gender balanced across the 8 nominations, and there should be a strong representation of international assessors with a broad global distribution. And assessors' nominations should all be from different universities, so no 2 should be from the same institution. And a maximum of 2 nominations in total can be from institutions within the Republic of Ireland. Where a nomination is from a research institution, the nominee must demonstrably be able to comment on all elements of the academic profile. So, for example, the teaching and learning and contribution elements as well. Nominations from research funders, charitable foundations, government organisations are not appropriate. And promotion only follows if the external assessors clearly agree with the recommendation of APC or EPPC, and those committees meet again to review the comments and in most cases accept the comments of the external assessors. So just to flag here the importance of these criteria that are laid out around external assessors. When the promotions committees look at the external assessors and note, for example, gender imbalance or 2 nominations from the same university, we have to go back and ask for changes to be made, and that just delays going out and seeking assessment. So it is worth paying attention to getting these right first time. Assessors, so just some additional information here. So in terms of the nomination of the assessors, the level at which the assessors themselves operate is important. So we would be looking really for parity when we're looking for assessors for an established professor. And ideally, in the case of both a senior lecturer, associate professor, or the professor in, we're looking for nominations at a higher grade, so that are in a position to comment on those grades of application. The assessors must have no substantial or recent conflict of interest with the applicant that they're being asked to assess. And both the candidate and the head of school should avoid nominating anyone with whom the school or research institute has had a recent formal interaction or with whom the candidate has collaborated. So there are some guidelines on conflict of interest on the promotions website, and it is worth taking a look at. So all assessors are asked to declare any conflict of interest, and if they declare a conflict of interest, we can't take forward their assessment. So again, it can build delay into the system, which is quite challenging to overcome. Reapplication to the scheme is not normally permitted within 2 years of an unsuccessful application, though there are some exceptions, which I'll talk about in a moment, and application is via the HR portal. So in terms of promotions, grades and tracks, as I'm sure you've gathered, because I've mentioned it a number of times, there are 3 grades. So there's senior lecturer, associate professor. There's professor in, and that's professor in and then insert discipline, and established professor. And the professor in and the established professor have 3 tracks. So there's the teaching and learning track, the research and scholarship track, and the leadership track. And the senior lecturer and associate professor level, you have the professor type A and the professor type B. And so there's the type that you apply to is relevant there as well, and you can make an active choice about applying on the type A or the type B route. So for professor in, the level of achievement expected for promotion to professor in is halfway between that of senior lecturer, associate professor, and that for established professor. Leadership plays a more significant role in a professor in level in comparison to a senior lecturer, associate professor level, and the default adjective as used in the guidelines, and unless otherwise explicitly stated, is outstanding. And so for the established professor, the level of achievement expected is double that of the senior lecturer, associate professor. There's a very significant emphasis on leadership, regardless of which track you're applying to. And the default adjective, with all the usual caveats, is exceptional. Existing personal professors, like all other grades, must go through the application process in order to be promoted for established professor, and it's treated by the committee as any other application. So it isn't a nod-through process. So anyone who's thinking about doing that, do fill in the application as fully and clearly as possible. It will be possible to fail to meet a single non-core criterion on your application and still be promoted if the assessment of the committee, there's enough compensating achievements in the rest of the application. And basically, this is what we call an in-the-round assessment. So I am going to flick back to that table to explain what I mean by an in-the-round assessment. So in-the-round assessment only applies when a single non-core criteria, so these ones that are labelled with Roman numerals, in this example here, has not been met. So if you look at the table we have here, the 3 core criterion on columns 1, 2, and 3 are all yeses. We've actually got 2 no's here, but let's imagine that final one for number 10, pedagogic funding, there was a yes. So then we've got 1 no. So then an in-the-round discussion follows, which is basically looking at whether the performance in the other criteria was at a standard where overall, in the round, the application is worthy of promotion. So the panel takes particular note of where it feels that applicants have performed extremely well or exceeded the criterion, and that can be very helpful within these in-the-round discussions. So just so you're aware of what that process is, what it looks like, and how it works. Go back to, so, okay, there we are. So yeah, so a case where the candidate's achievements in the majority of other criteria are in the academic judgment of the committee significantly above the level required. So that's what an in-the-round discussion is, if you hear it referred to. In terms of the prima facie case not being established, there is a 2-year rule about reapplication, but there are some exceptions to that. So obviously, a successful applicant can reapply again immediately for the next grade if they feel that's appropriate. If an applicant fails on a single non-core criteria but isn't promoted, i.e. the in-the-round discussion took place, but promotion wasn't agreed, then the wait is for 1 year. So you can apply again after 1 year, so there's a reduced wait. If the application is unsuccessful, failing on any of the core criteria, then the 2-year wait applies, and failing on more than one non-core criteria, again, the 2-year wait applies. So in terms of submitting the application and the supporting materials that are required, so an up-to-date, accurate, crisp profile needs to be downloaded and submitted, ideally in reverse chronological order, and there's detail about that on the website. 2 pages of student feedback needs to be submitted, and a teaching portfolio of up to 23 pages. As in all cases, if you go over the page or the word limit that's specified, then that information is removed and the promotions committee doesn't get to see it. So be careful around the length of submissions that are made. And there isn't a case for extenuating circumstances to add more into any of these boxes. Sorry, there isn't a provision for extenuating circumstances to add more in. The 3 strongest or most important publications, so there's a part of the application where you're asked to identify your 3 strongest and most important publications, and to add a commentary of up to 300 words for each of these publications, explaining, and it varies depending on what the publication is and the context, but maybe information about its originality, its significance, the rigor of the experimental design. In some cases, the role of the author if it's a multi-authored publication. I've seen it used very well, in particular where interdisciplinary research is being used, and it's kind of explaining the context and the importance of the interdisciplinarity within the publication, those kind of things. So it's up to you how you use that information, but you're helping the committee to understand the importance, significance, quality of the publications that you're pulling out. You're then also asked to provide a list of up to the next 20 strongest or most important publications. Again, that's for you to decide based on your own sort of criteria. You're not asked to add a commentary other than to explain your role where there's a multi-author publication. And that is a helpful thing to do because different disciplines have different norms around author positioning and, you know, where, for example, a PI would sit, where a lead author is, what the function of a submitting author is. So it can be very helpful to the committee if you explain that in the context of your own discipline. There are 3 external, so you're also asked to submit your external assessor nominations. So alongside those of the head of school, there are 8 external assessor nominations. And you're also asked to submit 3 reference reports, 1 internal and 2 external. So you as the applicant are asked to seek these reports and submit them as part of your application. So this is changed. It changed in advance of the last round. It's changed because it was becoming apparent that not everyone's external assessor reports were being seen by the committee at the time the panel was meeting. There are a number of lists and checklists on the website, so please do use the checklists and check that you've submitted everything and that it's at the right length and in the appropriate format. If you miss things and it's past the deadline, you can't add them in, your application will be rejected and you'll have to wait until the next time round, which is hugely disappointing. So please use the checklists. You do need to confirm that your performance for growth review is up to date. And just a note for anyone who's reapplying, it's entirely optional, but there is a tick box, which we call a confidence check. So where you might have applied previously at the same level and were unsuccessful for whatever reason, if you're reapplying at the same level, you can tick a box that allows the committee to look at the previous scores, and the only thing they're doing is checking that they're not scoring something no this time that was previously scored a yes. It doesn't work in reverse. So that's the only check they're making, and essentially it's a confidence check. You don't have to agree to it, and you can change your mind at any time, but just to be aware of what it is and what its purpose is. So moving on to the criteria. So I'll start with Senior Lecturer, Associate Professor, and I'm going to highlight the Type A contract first. So, as I've said, and as you saw from the example scoring box that I showed you, there are 3 core criteria, which are around research and scholarly activity, teaching, supervising, mentoring students, and contribution. So if you remember the default adjective for Senior Lecturer Associate Professor is substantial, but this is a contract type A. So the criteria for a lecturer on a contract A around scholarly research and scholarly activity is a little bit different. It's quite fulsome, but it's understood to refer to research and other forms of scholarship associated with research-informed teaching and with keeping up to date with developments in pedagogy and your discipline. So this can include pedagogic research or research as traditionally conceived in your discipline, or a combination of both of them. So it doesn't have an adjective beside it, and it's recognizing that it's nuanced in regard of contract type A. And then the adjective substantial comes in terms of a substantial record of teaching, supervision and mentoring of taught students, and a substantial contribution to organizational leadership, both internally and externally at regional, national and international level. So if we now just move that on to contract type B for senior lecturer and associate professor, you now see that the adjective substantial is there for all three of the core criteria. So because contract type B has a greater balance of research activity within the contract, you can see that there is substantial records of research and scholarship, teaching and supervision and contribution. As you also will have seen from that example table, there are then additional what we call non-core criteria, and there are 10 of those, and you're asked to select 5. And it's entirely up to you what 5 of these you select, and that's all about being aligned with your strengths. And it doesn't have to form any particular pattern or have a particular bias in any direction. It's very much about reflecting where you believe you can make the best cases in your application. I would say do look very carefully at the guidance and do try and align as clearly as you can with the guidance. So moving on to the professor in grade. So the adjectives change and the structure changes. So if you remember, there are 3 tracks at both the professor in and the established professor grades. So that's research and scholarship, teaching and learning, and leadership. So you'll find the pattern repeats itself even if the words change between professor in and established professor. So in this case, we're looking at a professor in on the research and scholarship track. And here, I'll just point out to you on this page that there's a few more core criteria, but we'll look at, you can see there's 2 core criteria that I'm showing you here. So one is the core criteria of a sustained, and there's the adjective, outstanding record of research outputs, recognized for originality, significance and rigor. So this is research and scholarship track, and we're looking at the adjective outstanding. So if you go down to the bottom of this list, so Roman numeral number 7 there, there's the other core criteria. And in this case, you can see the adjective is substantial, because this is the research and scholarship track, so substantial contribution to teaching, supervision and mentoring of students. So you can see how the adjectives can be used, and they can change a little bit depending on which track you're applying to. And you can see if you look at these non-core criteria, so in this, in the professor in scheme, you have to submit against all of the non-core criteria. So the pick and mix isn't available except for senior lecturer, associate professor. And you can see again, you need to keep an eye out for these adjectives here. And you can see where they're called out there. Okay, so just to illustrate the point here, so if I'm looking at professor in and teaching and learning track, you can see here that this is flipped around. So the outstanding core contribution is to teaching, supervision and mentoring. And you go down to number 7, and the second core criteria here is now a substantial record of research outputs, etc., because this is the teaching and learning track. And then again, keeping an eye on the definitions and adjectives associated with the non-core criteria. So the pattern is a little bit different for the professor in leadership track. So here you can see there are 4 core criteria. And again, keeping an eye on the adjectives here. So you've got core criteria around outstanding leadership at university level, outstanding leadership at national and or international level. And then you can see substantial there being used for substantial contribution to teaching and supervision and substantial records of teaching outputs. So you can see how the adjectives get nuanced depending on what track you're applying for. And then all 3 tracks have 2 more core criteria, which are the same across each of the tracks. So this is outstanding, there's the adjective again, sustained evidence of high quality organisational leadership or management skills, and outstanding and sustained contribution to intellectual, cultural, social life external to the university at regional, national or international level. So those are the two core criteria which align with the term contribution. So if I move on to the established professor, and I'll go a little bit more quickly, but the pattern is the same. So here we've got the established professor research and scholarship. What's changed is the adjectives. So here the default adjective is exceptional. And because this is the research track, the core criteria around research is exceptional. And if you look at Roman numeral 7 there, the core criteria around teaching, supervision and mentoring students is outstanding. And then if we look at the teaching and learning track, again, that change around has happened. So the core exceptional criteria is for teaching, learning and supervision, and the core outstanding criteria for research outputs. So you can hopefully start to see the pattern, and that pattern holds good. So again, in the leadership track for established professor, we've got those core criteria which are about exceptional leadership, and then the adjective outstanding in relation to contribution to teaching and record of research outputs. And then again, those two contribution core criteria are common across all three of the tracks, and those are both exceptional contribution, both internally to the university and externally at regional, national or international level. So there's a lot more information on the website, so please do have a look at the guidance, and please do keep looking at the guidance. And if there's any confusion, then you can email the academic promotions email and ask for further information. There are also FAQs on the website as well. So just a few final notes. Members of the APC, EPPC and APAC, which is the appeals panel, are bound to absolute confidentiality in respect of all deliberations of the committees, subject only to the fact that documents are FOIable in the process. So they can't talk about about what goes on in the committee at all. And please don't put them in a difficult position by asking them. The only time they can talk about it is when they are giving feedback at the direction of the committee and the request of the individual applicant. Under no circumstances should candidates approach or seek to influence members of APC, EPPC and APAC on any matter relating to their application on the scheme. The members of the three committees may not advise applicants either individually or in groups in respect of the promotion scheme. And heads of school and deans of college are required to respect and maintain the confidentiality of individual applicants as well. So they can't approach members of the committee on behalf of applicants either. So your application must be on the round 12 application form. If you've previously downloaded one, just make sure that you've got the right round application form. And because we've made the transition from Iris to Chris, it's important that it's your Chris profile that's downloaded and downloaded as a Word document, and then edit it. So categorizing your output types in line with the application form, and in particular reverse chronological order is very, very helpful to the committee. Just to remind you, and we talked about it in some detail, that following APC and EPC meeting and deliberating, if a prima facie case is established, there is an external assessment stage of the process. We do appreciate that that can be a time-consuming stage and a frustrating wait. It is a hugely important part of the process, but we're doing what we can to try and speed it along. And please, 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 please give yourself plenty of time to submit your application. Don't leave it to the last minute. If anything goes wrong, or if you accidentally miss a document and the deadline passes, your application will be rejected. And after all the work it takes to prepare an application, that's a really awful outcome. In completing the application form, please do be sure that you're addressing the specific information being requested in any one section. So do keep referencing the guidelines. Do use every available opportunity in the application to explain the significance of your output, activity, or contribution. The promotion panel builds up a wealth of experience over time, but they can't add in any information that you don't give them. So it's really important that you take opportunities to explain what you do, why it's important, what the outcome has been, what the impact has been. Don't leave it to the panel to fill the gap, because they won't be able to do that for you. Don't assume they'll just know. We ask you to try and avoid repeating information between different sections or criteria on the form. So we tend to call it duplication or excessive cross-referencing. So in some instances, you will need to duplicate information. But when you do, what you need to do is try and tease it apart, so that you might be referencing the same activity, but you're explaining what part of that activity specifically aligns with the criterion. So don't do cut and paste from one criterion box to another. You need to really tease it apart and explain what part of the activity aligns with the criterion. Otherwise, it looks like duplication, and eventually the committee isn't able to accept continual duplication of information, because it's giving yourself multiple recognition for the same activity, unless you explain clearly what the difference is. Do seek advice on your application draft from experienced or senior colleagues, people that you know who've been through the process and been successful. And just to highlight, the promotions committee can only assess the information they receive through the application. So it's very, very important that you're able to give as much information and explanation and clearly highlight the importance and the significance of what you're doing on the application, to give yourself the best chance possible, and to give the promotions committee the most amount of information to work with. So this is my bonus slide after having chaired 2 rounds of the promotions committee. Frequent mistakes are missing deadlines, getting word counts wrong, or missing out sections or information that's been requested. They're all really, really unfortunate. It generally leads to frustration or disappointment. Often we end up not being able to accept the application, so it has to wait for another 6 months. Or, there's a sense that there's things that the promotions committee can't see because it's had to be removed because it's gone over the word count. So neither of those are good scenarios. So it's a real challenge for promotions committee when the information being provided against a criteria doesn't align with the section and the guidance that's available on the section. So don't write what you think should be in there. Write what the guidance is asking you to share in relation to the criterion. So you can't change the criterion according to what you would like it to be. It is what it is, and you need to evidence how you align with the criterion. And not using the breadth of evidence is available as outlined in the guidance. So quite a good example that comes up is there's a criterion which says, please reference the salient literature. It's a lot to do with theoretical currency in teaching and a number of teaching and learning criteria. And it's incredibly common for no reference to be made to the salient literature. And that's a big sort of miss that the committee would be looking for, because that evidences that maintenance of theoretical currency. So don't do yourself a disservice. I'm sure you're doing the work, but you need to evidence it in the way that's required by the guidance. Assuming the promotions committee will understand the significance of your output activity achievement without a supporting explanation, just because you know it really, really, really well and you're fully immersed in it, the committee just doesn't have that level of immersion, so that you need to tell them what's important, significant, and great about what you do. And one example in particular that comes up is about describing impact. So it would be not an uncommon mistake to describe the activity but not evidence how a change has resulted. So you need to do both. You need to both explain the activity, but then you need to describe the impact. So what has changed as a result of that activity? And ideally, you're able to evidence that in some way. So that's just a very common one where the activity is described beautifully, but not what the outcome of the activity has been. And repeating information across sections, I've already spoken to this. Sometimes it is necessary to duplicate, but you do need to tease apart. So you might be referencing the same activity, but you need to kind of tease apart what part of that activity aligns with the criterion. So it can't be just straight duplication across multiple criterion. So as we said, the scheme runs every 6 months, and the deadlines are at 4 p.m. on the last working day of the month. The application window is open for. So this next application, round 12, which is coming up, is the deadline is at 4 p.m. on Friday, the 29th of August. And then there are following deadlines in February and August 2026. So there's, as I've said, there's huge amounts of information about the promotions process and the criteria and guidance around the criteria on the website. You can find that through academic promotions or just doing a search for it. There's a set of FAQs that keep being updated as more questions are asked. And you can also send questions directly to academic promotions at universityofgalway.ie. And then the application portal is through the HR system, so make sure you know where that is, and if you have any problems finding that, then again reach out to academic promotions at universityofgalway.ie. And I think that's my last slide, so you'll be relieved to know that I'm